The structure itself, the separate structures, are typically the same thing. You just got to make sure and check. Why am I paying my insurance if this sort of thing isn't covered?
Right.
Well, to find out whether those things are covered is not the time to do it when you have a claim.
Right.
The time to do that is when you're getting your policy. You want to make sure that your structure is properly covered. You need to find out things like actual cash value versus replacement cost. So those are things you want to find out on the front side instead of the back side. It's a pay me now or pay me later type scenario. Doing your investigation and your homework on the front side is always the best case scenario.
Thanks for joining us on another REI NWA podcast. I'm your host, Coley Bailey, principal broker at Lone Rock Realty. And today, this is podcast number 43, and we have Ruben Perez with Farmers Insurance.
Yes, sir.
And thanks for joining us in the studio.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we are going to be talking about some of the crazy storms that happened, record tornadoes.
Absolutely.
Devastating for our area. And so obviously that affects insurance, and these insurance companies are kind of strapped right now with all the repairs that are out there. They're getting hit with a lot of expenses.
Absolutely.
We'll talk about that a little bit. Before we get into all the fun insurance details, give us the rundown on who you are and where you came from and what got you into doing what you're doing now.
Absolutely. So my name is Ruben Perez. My wife and I own and operate a branch of Farmers Insurance in Lowell, Arkansas. And shortly after we started that about 9 years ago, this September, we joined REI. And as a point of just meeting and greeting people and networking and building our business. And ever since then, we've just kind of really been embedded and ingrained in that business, and really intrigued in going down the road of investing ourselves with REI as well, learning a lot from a lot of folks there. I've been in this area for, probably the better part of 30 years. I was with Walmart, kind of left Walmart after about 29, 30 years of service with them, and started, doing my own thing with Farmers. That's how we got involved with REI. That's how we got involved in insurance. I just was looking for something here locally to keep me rooted to the area. My wife's from this area, so we kind of met and started Farmers kind of right in the same neck of the woods of time frame.
Awesome. Cool. Well, so let's talk about how these storms have really affected our local insurance companies.
Sure. So, over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a record number of catastrophic losses from coast to coast. Mm-hmm. And, people don't really know and understand, I guess, how the very 30,000 foot level of insurance works. And I have this conversation probably a dozen times a day. And, when they say, if I file a claim, will it affect my rates? And, the answer to that is the lawyer answer, yes and no. For the most part, you have a deer hit your car, a hailstorm on your car, tree falls on your home. Obviously, you can't do anything to avoid that, versus like a speeding ticket or, rear-ending somebody and it's your fault. But every time a claim is filed, and when you consider the catastrophic losses from coast to coast with all the companies that are out there, it's like a big pool of money. And when the money comes in from people's premium every month, and then the money goes out as it relates to claims, whether it's a hailstorm, a earthquake, a wildfire, they don't just consume a path of like tornadoes, they consume like counties at a time. Yeah. And I mean, those carriers that are in those areas, there's so many of them that is just simply pulled out to unprofitable areas, because for every dollar that's coming in from customers, $1.40 is going out as an industry.
Right.
And that's historically, over the last 5 to 10 years, the larger the company is, the more reserve money that it has, the more they can weather that storm and hold on to their rates and stabilize them. But the more and more closer they get to becoming unprofitable, they have no choice but to pass those costs on to the consumer.
Right. And
that's kind of the way that it's been over the last 5 to 10 years. When you look at catastrophic losses, they affect everyone. Mm-hmm. And the ones here were no different. I filed probably over 200 claims between Saturday and Monday morning. That was that holiday weekend. Yeah. And in this area, Farmers itself had over 2,000, and that was just Farmers.
Wow.
And now there's a lot of aftermath. Hey, what about my claim? Hey, how is this all the money I'm going to get?
Right.
What does my payout look like? And so a lot of questions, a lot of stuff going on in that regard. So
yeah, so I mean, you file a claim, it doesn't necessarily make your rate jump up right then, But if a lot of people file claims, it
affects everybody.
It goes into the algorithm, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the companies can only be unprofitable so long. There's literally about 5 to 7 smaller carriers in Arkansas, just Arkansas, that have become insolvent and had to get out of business.
Wow.
And, when that happens, if they're what's called a rated carrier, they're insured by the state. So if their claims are still sitting there, the state will step in and help them.
Wow.
But if they're unrated carriers, the state's not there to provide support for insolvency. So those people that have claims or future claims on active policy at the time are just out of luck.
How would a consumer find out if their company was in that boat or not?
Right, that's a good question. So the majority of the larger carriers, the Farmers, the State Farm, the Allstate, the Farm Bureaus, they're all rated carriers. And they're typically rated by the state, and they're regulated by the state. And they have to ask for rate increases from the state, and the state approves them. The state, does their thing. What they do, they'll either, say, no, that's not enough, or no, that's too much. But there's a lot of things that can happen there. As it relates to consumers, they need to ask, is this a rated company or is this an unrated company? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with unrated companies because they will take the things that other carriers will not.
Right.
Maybe it's a very desolate area with not a fire department nearby and nobody wants to touch it. And there's still a resolution for them, but sometimes it's an unrated carrier with a co-insurance or a higher deductible and things like that. So.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the difference between homeowner policies and investor policies.
Yeah. So a homeowner policy, there's a lot of things that the carrier knows because they're running your credit. They know who's in the home. It's a spouse. You got your dates of birth. They know who's there, right? When it comes to a landlord property, they're relying much on the landlord to make sure and regulate who's going in that home.
Right.
So sometimes the rates can be a little bit higher because of that unknown factor, depending on the zip code, the community that they're in, and the area around them, But for the most part, the policies are pretty standard. Mm-hmm. The one big missing thing is that the personal property for a landlord policy is going to be substantially lower because the landlord themselves don't live there. Their personal belongings are not in there.
Right.
They may still have appliances and things that are theirs personally that they want to cover. But for the most part, then you have things like for a homeowner, if I can't live there because my home is under a claim, like a tree fell in the middle of the living room, well, in those kind of situations, I would be paid what's called loss of use, and I would be able to live somewhere else temporarily while they're rebuilding my home, and I wouldn't have double rent.
Right.
So the other thing in a landlord policy, it could include loss of rents. That could or could not be there. You have to double check that to make sure that if your tenant can't stay there because of the same reason, the tree's in the middle of their living room, they're not going to probably want to pay rent and somewhere else.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure that you have loss of rents, and that's a huge difference.
Yeah, that would be
in
a
that
big
regard.
deal.
Yeah, you may not have rent coming in because they can't afford to pay double.
Yeah.
Those are things that are typically covered differently in the two, but the structure itself, the separate structures, are typically the same thing. You just got to make sure and check.
Okay, so I'm sure you get asked this all the time. How would someone go about maximizing their claim?
Good question.
getting the most out of the insurance company.
Yeah, I mean, the insurance company's there to pay out the claim. That's the reason you've been paying. People ask that all the time. Why am I paying my insurance if this sort of thing isn't covered?
Right.
Well, to find out whether those things are covered is not the time to do it when you have a claim.
Right.
The time to do that is when you're getting your policy. And typically what we see, are people saying, gee, I just want the cheapest thing you got. Give me the best rate you get. And, I wish I could make the rates up, but I don't. If any agent tells you that, run fast because they don't make up the rates. You want to make sure that your structure is properly covered. You need to find out things like actual cash value versus replacement cost. That's the payout method that the insurance companies use to pay you on your claim. Actual cash value does not include depreciation, but is a cheaper insurance. Replacement cost value is a more expensive insurance, but it includes getting back and recuperating a lot of your replacement depreciated value.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit more expensive, but at the end of the day, we had a lot of people just now finding out after they had their claim on their landlord property that, wow, I didn't have fence coverage, or I didn't have a separate structure coverage. I didn't know that was even a thing, that it wasn't included.
Yeah.
Or it's paid out at actual cash value and I lost so much money. I have a lot of folks that will tell me, I found a cheaper insurance rate, and there's always a cheaper insurance rate no matter where you go or what you do. You could find the best insurance rate around, and 3 months later go shop it again and you'll find a cheaper insurance rate. This is the nature of the volatility that's going on right now. But there's typically a reason for it. Either you're a new customer, you get a new customer discount that the other company can't offer you. Perhaps they raised your deductible to a 2%, a 3%, which is in these days is very, very expensive, because if your home is $300,000 and you got a 3%, that's a $9,000 deductible. But my rate was cheaper.
Right.
So you got to be careful of all of those nuances, or that there's a co-insurance. Like I have a claim, my replacement on my roof was $14,000, but there's a 20% co-insurance on it. So I pay just like your medical insurance. I paid 80% of it after my deductible. So your deductible is $5,000. Then you got to pay 20% of that, which is another, $2,800. So now you're at $7,000 or $8,000 for that $14,000 roof. And all of a sudden that cheaper insurance rate doesn't seem so desirable.
Right.
So those are things you want to find out on the front side instead of the back side. It's a pay me now or pay me later type scenario.
Right.
It really is. So doing your investigation and your homework on the front side is always the best case scenario.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a lot more we could get into, I'm sure, and we'll be doing that at the Landlord Lunch. That's coming up on August 15th.
Perfect.
At the Wagon Wheel Cafe in Springdale, and it's going to be at noon. So come on out.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and meet this guy. Ask your insurance questions. As always, remember, it'll be $20 at the door if you are not an REI NWA member. If you are, $0 at the door, and you get years worth of backlog programs just like the one that's coming up in the back end of our member website. So make sure to come and attend this event and join REI as soon as you get the chance. All right. Well, thanks for coming in.
It's my pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll catch you guys on the next one.